Oh, yeah. We'd have to make the trip in the suspension capsules.
Memory is a funny thing. It can help you or it can betray you. And sometimes it can just be downright bizarre. When we were kids, one of the mass delusional memories that most people had was about Star Wars. Everybody swore up and down that they had seen the lost big scenes that have now become famous on the Blu-ray. They thought that they had seen them in the theater when it first ran on opening day, and then they concocted this story in their mind that it had all been deleted afterwards, cut out for subsequent screenings. Well, what really happened was everybody who went to see Star Wars as a kid also had the Star Wars storybook. And in the Star Wars storybook, they printed it before the script was finalized, and so they actually have photos in here of Biggs and Luke talking in the deleted scenes. That's where this mass delusional memory comes from. The reason I bring this up is because we've gotten a lot of, I wouldn't call it vitriol, but we've gotten a lot of conflict about our Thundercats video, which was the first video that we ever posted on RetroBlasting. The specific conflict is that everybody thinks there is a plausible explanation for why Lion-O ages and everybody else doesn't before they land on third Earth. There has been just a plethora of comments come in about this from people who are adamant that they remember a concrete explanation for why Lion-O's pod allowed him to age and everyone else's didn't. Now, when I first heard these comments, I thought to myself, you know, I screen these cartoons very carefully before I make feature videos about them, so maybe I missed something. I don't think I would have missed something like that. I was pretty sure that I was confused when I watched that pilot episode. So I went back to the original DVD and watched it again and again and again, and didn't find the evidence that they asserted was there. But before I get into showing you the specific footage, I'd really like to go back and look at some of these comments because they really show how so many people can have this collective memory that isn't real. I wouldn't have trusted a 10-year-old who only thanks to the stasis of his pod being busted jumped up to a 25-year-old with the same mentality of when he was 10. You blatantly ignored the reason why Lion-O was older after they arrived, while the rest had not aged at all. So in case you have just overlooked this, I will explain to you and all that read the reason Lion-O acts like a dunce. When they escaped the planet, they went into a cryosleep of sorts. All of them were in a pod, but the pod Lion-O was put into had a malfunction of sorts, so instead of him staying the same age, it slowly aged him even while in the capsule. As a reviewer, it should be your goal to explain every detail, even if it will make the show look better than you feel it should be. Lion-O's stasis capsule malfunctioned. They were in suspended animation while his pod was cracked, making him age slow. I think you must understand that Lion-O is a kid. The reason he is an adult in the series is because his stasis tube had a malfunction, and his body aged during the trip. It is explained that the cryogenic chamber was damaged. That's why he was the only one who aged. Don't they explain that Lion-O's sleep tube thing on the ship malfunctioned, and that is why he aged and the others didn't? The reason that Lion-O aged during the trip to Earth and the others remained unchanged was due to a malfunction on their spacecraft. The Thundercats were supposed to be hibernating in suspended animation during the long trip to Earth, but Lion-O's hibernation malfunctioned, causing him to age. The pod had a crack in it. The explanation about the pod really is there. Thundercats started airing in my country for the first time last year, and they really did have a part where they said his pod was damaged, and that's why he aged. I might be misremembering, but I have a vague recollection of the comic book tie-in covering the malfunctioning stasis pod in more detail than the show did. I think that Lion-O may have gotten the wrong pod, or messed with it somehow before entering the pod. As you can see, we got a wide variety of comments, but they all had one commonality. They all asserted with confidence that there was a line in which somebody established that Lion-O's pod had malfunctioned in the pilot episode. And some people even went so far as to reference other mediums. They referenced magazines, and they referenced comic books. But the truth of the matter is, we're not really focused on those other mediums. We want to know what the actual original show said, because really at the end of the day, the show itself should be able to explain to you everything you need to know about a situation. That's not a qualifying statement. This isn't an episode of RetroBlasting that's here to rip on the Thundercats or demean it in some way. I'm simply here to say everyone's saying one thing, the show says something else, and we need to establish what that is because that's fact, not fiction. And I think a lot of people get confused about what their minds and their imaginations fill into those gaps versus what's actually said, because there's a difference between what is literal and what is inferred or interpreted. And I think that's an important distinction that we need to make. So as you can see, everybody said the pod malfunctioned or the pod had a crack in it. Well, let's go back to the original show, and I'm going to put this out there and just risk getting a copyright slapped on me because I want this to be put to bed once and for all. Lion-O and his crew, or Jaga's crew, are fleeing their planet Thundera, and they're headed to parts unknown. And at that point, Jaga decides he's got to put the rest of the Thundercats into stasis. Well, there's an establishing shot of the pods. Let's see if there's a crack in it. I don't see any cracks depicted in the artwork of those pods. There's nothing that stands out or calls out that Lion-O's pod is destined to malfunction. So let's go to the next theory. The next theory that a lot of people purport is that there's a shot right before the ship crashes into Third Earth. There's a shot of almost like an instrument reading, and it has the numbers 1, 2, 3, and 4. And 1, 2, and 3 are staying in the green, and 4 dips precipitously into the red. Some people conjecture that that is the indication that Lion-O's pod is malfunctioning. Well, there's a few problems with this theory. One is that it only goes up to number 4, and as we all know, there's Tigra, Chitara, Panthro, Lion-O, Wily Kit, Wily Cat, and Snarf. That's 7 Thundercats. So we know there's more than 4 pods. So I don't think that indicates pod failure. I think that's actually an indication of the engines on the flagship, because that's around the time that the engines begin to fail on the ship because they're attacked by Slythe. And that's when the ship begins to crash through the atmosphere. Also, you have to remember that that indicator started malfunctioning or showing an alert seconds before it actually crashed on Third Earth. So would Lion-O really have aged that quickly in 10 seconds? I don't think so. So I think we have to rule out that theory. The last theory, and one of the more prominent ones, and I keep calling them theories, I should be referring to them as false memories, because people really believe that these things are out there in the show, is that the explanation happens when Lion-O awakes from his pod, which is thrown from the ship before it wrecks, and he has a flashback to lines that Jaga said. Jaga doesn't say some aging may occur due to a malfunction. Jaga doesn't say that some aging may occur in some pods and not others. The way Jaga words it is some aging may occur in these pods, almost like a product disclaimer for a microwave, where it's like some aging will occur in these pods, the Black & Decker Mark II. Like it's not calling out a malfunction or a problem. It's putting down a blanket statement. And so let me just play it for you, because I don't want to interpret it. I just want you to hear exactly what's said.
Even though the suspension capsules slow down the aging process, some aging does take place.
So what can we really conclude from all this? Well, I think it's pretty obvious. There's a collective delusional memory out there where a lot of people inferred or interpreted a line that wasn't there. That's not a statement against Thundercats as a show. It's just these things happen. They happen with the big scenes in Star Wars, and they happen with this. There is no real clear-cut explanation for why Lion-O's pod malfunctioned and nobody else's did, because the lines state that the pods are all the same and the pods will all allow for aging, and yet nobody else aged. So either it was left on the cutting room floor or it was forgotten to be put in there by the writers. Maybe they didn't think it was important. It was important to me because it jumped out at me when I was watching it before I did the original Thundercats video, and I thought, well, that's kind of weird. I need to point that out. But it's not me coming at the show and deliberately leaving out information that wasn't there to make my case that, Thundercats plots have holes. A lot of cartoons plots have holes, and I've pointed them out. Thundercats has a plot hole here. That shouldn't impact your enjoyment of the show. If you enjoy the show, then obviously it's not really a problem, and kudos to you. But here at RetroBlasting, what we do is we look at these shows and we find what's good about them, we find what's bad about them, and we find what's weird about them. And that was something that struck me as very weird. Some people say, well, the explanation was in a fan magazine, or they say it was in a comic book, or they're getting it confused with the reboot of the show that had a better explanation for why Lion-O aged and nobody else did. Well, that's all well and good from a sort of, holistic perspective on the whole franchise, but we have to really look at the actual original show that was accessible to most of us when we were little. A lot of us didn't have access to the comic books or the fanzines or anything like that. And I do think that these television shows, which are the primary vehicle for these properties, they should be self-contained. They should have all the information present that you need. And for most of the kids in America in 1985, Thundercats had what it needed. That's why you guys all love it so much. And that's great. But I didn't want anyone to continue to think that I was deliberately leaving something out in order to make the show look worse. I wasn't. I was calling out something I observed as it was on the show. So I hope this puts this argument to bed and we can all move on, whether we're Thundercats fans or Silverhawks fans or Voltron fans or whatever, and move on to the next episodes and the next debates and the next discussions. So I'll see you on the next one.